Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, looking around the small motorcycle repair shop he had worked at for 3 years. The place wasn't much to look at, with oil stains on the concrete floor and tools scattered across workbenches, but it was his world. He loved the smell of motor oil and the satisfaction of bringing broken machines back to life. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the rumble of a powerful engine echoed through the narrow street outside. Marcus looked up from the Yamaha he was fixing to see a massive Harley-Davidson pulling up to the shop. The bike was a beauty, all chrome and black paint. But even from a distance, Marcus could hear something wrong with the engine. The rider climbed off slowly, removing a black helmet to reveal a weathered face covered with scars and a thick gray beard. His leather vest displayed the unmistakable colors of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The patches and symbols told stories of a life lived on the edge, and his cold blue eyes seemed to size up everything around him. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Growing up in this neighborhood, he had heard plenty of stories about the Hells Angels. They weren't people you wanted to cross or disappoint, but this was his job, and motorcycles were motorcycles, regardless of who rode them. The man walked into the shop with heavy boots that echoed on the concrete. He didn't speak at first, just looked around at the organized chaos of the workspace. When his eyes finally settled on Marcus, there was something almost predatory in his gaze. "You the mechanic?" the man asked, his voice rough like gravel. Marcus nodded, wiping his hands again nervously. "Yeah, that's me. Marcus, what can I do for you?" The biker jerked his thumb toward the Harley outside. "Bike's making noise it shouldn't be making. Started about 50 miles back. Figured I'd stop here before it gets worse." Marcus walked outside to examine the motorcycle. It was clearly a custom job, probably worth more than he made in 6 months. The chrome gleamed despite the dust from the road, and every detail showed the kind of care that only came from true love of the machine. He started the engine and immediately heard the problem. There was a knocking sound coming from deep within the motor, and the idle wasn't smooth. This wasn't a simple fix. The engine would need to be partially torn down, and some of the parts would be expensive. Back inside the shop, Marcus delivered the bad news. "It's going to need some serious work. The bearings are probably shot, and I'll need to check the pistons. Could be looking at $800 to $1,000 depending on what else I find." The biker's expression didn't change. He reached into his leather jacket, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might be reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thick roll of cash. "How long?" he asked simply. 2, maybe 3 days if I can get the parts delivered quickly," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The man peeled off several $100 bills and placed them on the workbench. "Fix it right. Money's not the problem. Time is." As the biker prepared to leave, Marcus realized he didn't even know the man's name. What should I put on the work order? I need a name and contact number." The man paused at the door, looking back with what might have been amusement. "Tommy, that's all you need to know. I'll be back Thursday morning." After Tommy left, Marcus called his parts supplier and arranged for rush delivery of everything he would need. The job would eat up most of his week, but the money was good, and honestly, he was curious about the bike. Custom Harleys like this one told stories, and Marcus had always been good at reading those stories. He spent the rest of the afternoon carefully disassembling the engine, taking photos at each step so he could put everything back exactly where it belonged. The damage was worse than he had initially thought. Someone had been running the bike hard, probably for a long time without proper maintenance. As he worked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this job was somehow different from the others. Maybe it was the intensity in Tommy's eyes, or maybe it was just the mystique that surrounded the Hells Angels. Either way, he was committed now. The next morning, the parts arrived early, and Marcus dove into the repair work with the kind of focus he reserved for his most challenging jobs. He replaced bearings, honed cylinders, and rebuilt the entire lower end of the engine. Every bolt was torqued to specification, every gasket carefully seated. By Wednesday evening, the Harley was purring like a contented cat. Marcus had done some of his best work, and he felt a deep satisfaction as he listened to the smooth idle of the rebuilt engine. The bike was better than new, and he knew it. Thursday morning came too quickly. Marcus arrived at the shop early, wanting to make sure everything was perfect before Tommy returned. He had detailed the entire motorcycle, polishing every piece of chrome until it gleamed like a mirror. When the rumble of another Harley announced Tommy's arrival, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. This was the moment of truth. Either he had done the job right, or he was about to face the wrath of a very dangerous man. Tommy walked into the shop and went straight to his bike without saying a word. He started it up and listened carefully to the engine for several long minutes. Then he shut it off and looked at Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. "Sounds good," he said finally. "Real good." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I replaced everything that needed replacing and then some. She should run smooth for a long time now." Tommy nodded and handed Marcus another $100 bill as a tip. "You do good work, kid. Might be back sometime." As the Hell's Angel rode away on his perfectly repaired motorcycle, Marcus had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He had no way of knowing that the man he had just helped was connected to forces that would soon turn his world upside down. 3 days after Tommy rode away on his repaired Harley, Marcus was under the hood of a Honda Civic when he heard his boss's voice calling his name. Frank Delacroix owned the repair shop and had a reputation for being tough but fair. He rarely raised his voice, which is why the sharp edge in his tone made Marcus look up immediately. "Marcus, get over here now!" Frank was standing by his office door, his face red with anger. In all the years Marcus had worked there, he had never seen his boss look this furious. Frank was a big man, former military, and when he was angry, people noticed. Marcus wiped his hands and walked over, his mind racing through everything he had done in the past few days. Had he made a mistake on someone's car? Had a customer complained about his work? He couldn't think of anything that would warrant this kind of reaction. "Get in the office," Frank said, stepping aside and slamming the door behind them once Marcus was inside. The office was small and cluttered, with invoices and parts catalogs stacked on every surface. Frank moved behind his desk but didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the surface, his knuckles white with tension. "What the hell were you thinking?" Frank demanded. Marcus was genuinely confused. "I don't know what you're talking about, Frank. What's wrong?" "Don't play dumb with me. The Hell's Angel. You worked on a Hell's Angel's bike." The pieces started falling into place, but Marcus still didn't understand why Frank was so upset. "Yeah, some guy named Tommy brought in a Harley. Engine rebuild. I did good work on it. What's the problem?" Frank's face got even redder. "The problem? The problem is that I specifically told you when you started working here that we don't service those people. We don't get involved with motorcycle clubs. We don't want that kind of attention." Marcus remembered the conversation from 3 years ago, but it had seemed more like general advice than a hard rule. "Frank, it was just a motorcycle repair. The guy paid cash, didn't cause any trouble. I treated it like any other job." "Any other job?" Frank's voice was getting louder. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know who these people are?" "I know they're bikers, but they're criminals, Marcus. Drug dealers, gun runners, extortionists. And now they know where we are. They know we'll work on their bikes. Do you think they're just going to leave us alone now?" Marcus tried to defend himself. The guy was polite. "He paid well. I don't see why." "Because you don't understand how this works," Frank interrupted. "First it's one bike. Then it's two. Then they're using our shop as a meeting place. Then they're storing things here we don't want to know about. Before you know it, we're part of their operation, whether we want to be or not." The reality of what Frank was saying began to sink in. Marcus had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know that motorcycle clubs operated by their own rules. What seemed like an innocent business transaction might have been the first step down a very dangerous path. "I didn't think about it that way," Marcus admitted. "I just saw a bike that needed fixing." Frank sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. "That's the problem, Marcus. You don't think. You just do whatever seems right at the moment without considering the consequences." "So what do we do now?" Marcus asked. If they come back, we're closed for repairs. We don't have the parts. We don't have the time. We refer them somewhere else." Marcus nodded, but something in Frank's expression suggested there was more to this conversation. His boss was looking at him with a mixture of anger and disappointment that went beyond just one mistake. "Frank, I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to cause problems. It won't happen again." Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring at some papers on his desk. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something that looked like sadness. "Marcus, you're a good mechanic, maybe the best I've ever had working for me. But this isn't the first time you've made a decision without thinking it through." Marcus wanted to argue, but he couldn't. There had been other incidents. Nothing serious, but times when he had bent rules or made choices that Frank had questioned. He had always thought of himself as someone who got things done, but maybe Frank saw it differently. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Frank continued. "About whether you're really a good fit here. This thing with the biker just confirms what I already suspected." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. "You're firing me?" "I'm letting you go, yes. I'll pay you through the end of the week, and I'll give you a good reference for your technical skills, but I can't have someone working for me who doesn't understand boundaries." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. This job was everything to him. It wasn't just how he paid his bills. It was his identity. He was a mechanic. This shop was where he belonged. "Frank, please, give me another chance. I'll follow every rule exactly. I'll check with you before I take on any job you might not like." Frank shook his head. "I've made my decision, Marcus. I'm sorry it worked out this way." Marcus stood up slowly, feeling numb. "When do you want me gone?" "Finish out the week. That gives you time to look for something else and gives me time to figure out how to cover your workload." Walking out of the office, Marcus felt like he was moving through a fog. The other mechanics in the shop looked up at him, and he could tell from their expressions that they had heard at least part of the conversation. News traveled fast in a small workplace. He went back to the Honda he had been working on, but his hands were shaking too much to hold the tools properly. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was falling apart because he had fixed a motorcycle for the wrong person. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had done some of his best work on Tommy's Harley. The engine rebuild had been perfect, the kind of job that should have made his boss proud. Instead, it had cost him everything. As he tried to focus on the simple task of changing spark plugs, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he had just told Tommy to take his bike somewhere else. But it was too late for that now. The damage was done, and his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine yet. 2 weeks after losing his job, Marcus sat in his small apartment staring at a stack of bills that seemed to grow larger every day. The unemployment office had told him it would take several weeks before his benefits would start, and his savings account was nearly empty. He had always lived paycheck to paycheck, never imagining he would need an emergency fund. The apartment felt smaller and more depressing each day. It was a one-bedroom place in an older building, nothing fancy, but it had been home for the past 4 years. Now the walls seemed to be closing in on him, and every sound from his neighbors reminded him that he had nowhere else to go. Marcus had spent the first week after being fired sending out resumes to every auto repair shop within a 50-mile radius. The responses had been disappointing. Some shops weren't hiring. Others wanted to know why he had left his last job so suddenly. When he tried to explain about the motorcycle incident without going into too much detail, potential employers seemed confused or suspicious. One shop owner had been more direct. "Frank Delacroix called me," he said during a phone interview. "He said you're a good mechanic, but that you have judgment problems. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement." Frank had promised to give him a good reference, but apparently his version of a good reference included warnings about Marcus's decision-making skills. It was becoming clear that finding another job in the local automotive industry was going to be much harder than he had expected. By the second week, Marcus was considering jobs outside his field. He had applied to work at a grocery store, a hardware store, and even a fast food restaurant. The pay would be terrible compared to what he had been making as a mechanic. But bills didn't care about his pride. The grocery store had been the most humiliating experience. The manager, who looked like he was barely out of high school, had interviewed Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "So you were a mechanic and now you want to stock shelves?" the kid had asked. "I need work," Marcus had replied simply. "Well, we can start you part-time at minimum wage. You'll need to be available for any shift, including weekends and holidays. And you'll need to cut your hair and cover up those tattoos." Marcus had small tattoos on his forearms. Nothing offensive, just some designs he had gotten years ago. The idea of covering them up felt like covering up part of himself, but he had nodded anyway. "We'll call you if we decide to move forward," the manager had said, which Marcus correctly interpreted as a polite rejection. The worst part wasn't the financial pressure or even the job rejections. It was the feeling that his entire identity was disappearing. He had been a mechanic for over a decade, starting as an apprentice right out of high school, working with his hands, solving mechanical puzzles, bringing broken machines back to life. That was who he was. Without it, he felt lost. Marcus found himself driving past his old shop several times, always slowing down to look through the windows. Frank had hired a temporary mechanic to cover some of his workload, a young guy who looked overwhelmed by the amount of work that needed to be done. Part of Marcus wanted to stop and offer to help, but he knew that would only make things worse. On a particularly gray Thursday morning, Marcus was walking back from another unsuccessful job interview when he saw a familiar motorcycle parked outside a diner. It was Tommy's Harley, the same bike he had repaired 3 weeks earlier. The chrome still gleamed and the engine sounded smooth even at idle. Through the diner window, Marcus could see Tommy sitting at a corner booth, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. For a moment, Marcus considered walking away, but something made him push through the door instead. The diner was one of those old-fashioned places with red vinyl booths and a long counter where regulars sat drinking coffee and arguing about sports. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, and the sounds of conversation and clattering dishes created a comfortable background noise. Tommy looked up as Marcus approached his table. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by what might have been mild surprise. "Well, if it isn't the bike mechanic," Tommy said, setting down his newspaper. "How's business?" Marcus slid into the booth across from him without being invited. "Actually, I lost my job because of you." Tommy raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem particularly concerned. "That's so? What happened?" "My boss didn't like that I worked on a Hells Angels bike. Said it would bring the wrong kind of attention to his shop." Tommy took a sip of his coffee and studied Marcus with those cold blue eyes. "Sounds like your boss is smarter than you are." The blunt response caught Marcus off guard. He had expected denial or maybe even an apology. Instead, Tommy seemed almost amused by the situation. "Look," Marcus said, "I did good work on your bike. I treated you with respect. I don't think it's fair that I lost my job over it." "Fair?" Tommy laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Kid, when has life ever been fair? You made a choice. Choices have consequences. That's how the world works." Marcus felt his anger rising. "I was just doing my job, fixing motorcycles. That's what I do." "What you did," Tommy corrected. "Sounds like you don't do much of anything right now." The words stung because they were true. Marcus sat in silence for a moment, watching Tommy butter a piece of toast with the same methodical precision he probably applied to everything in his life. "You know what your problem is?" Tommy said suddenly. "You don't understand people. You understand machines just fine, but people are a mystery to you." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you fixed my bike without thinking about what that meant. You didn't consider who I was or what working on my bike might cost you. You just saw a problem and solved it." Marcus wanted to argue, but he found himself thinking about Frank's similar criticism. Maybe they were both right. Maybe he did have a tendency to act without considering all the consequences. "So what am I supposed to do now?" Marcus asked. Tommy finished his toast and pushed his plate away. "That's not my problem to solve, but if you want some advice, here it is. Stop feeling sorry for yourself and figure out what you're actually good at." "I'm good at fixing motorcycles." "Maybe, but you're terrible at everything else that goes with running a business or working for someone else. Maybe you need to think about that." Tommy stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the table. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at Marcus. "Your work on my bike was solid," he said. "Best it's run in years. That's worth something, even if you don't know what to do with it yet." After Tommy left, Marcus sat alone in the booth staring at the $20 bill and thinking about what had just happened. The conversation had been strange and unsettling, but it had also given him something to think about besides his immediate problems. Maybe Tommy was right. Maybe he needed to stop focusing on what he had lost and start thinking about what he could build instead. Marcus was filling out his 10th job application of the week at a coffee shop when he overheard a conversation at the next table that made him look up from the paperwork. Two men in expensive suits were discussing a problem that sounded very familiar. "The entire fleet is down," one man was saying into his phone. "All 12 delivery trucks. Our regular mechanic says it's going to take 2 weeks minimum to get them all running again." The other man, older with gray hair and tired eyes, rubbed his temples. "We can't afford 2 weeks, David. We have contracts to fulfill. If we can't make our deliveries, we'll lose clients we've spent years building relationships with." Marcus tried not to stare, but his mechanic instincts were kicking in. Fleet problems usually meant one of several things: bad fuel, a recall issue, or systematic maintenance neglect. All of them were solvable if you knew what you were doing. The man on the phone hung up and shook his head. "Johnson's Auto can take 3 of them next week and maybe 2 more the following week. But that still leaves us with 7 trucks sitting in the lot doing nothing. What about other shops? I've called everyone in the area. Nobody wants to take on that much work at once, especially not with the deadline we need." Marcus found himself getting up and walking over to their table before he had fully decided what he was going to say. Both men looked up at him with the polite but wary expression people get when a stranger approaches. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "I couldn't help overhearing. You have a fleet of trucks that need repair?" The older man nodded cautiously. "Yes, but I don't think—" "I'm a mechanic," Marcus interrupted. "A good one. I just heard you say your regular guy needs 2 weeks. What if I told you I could have them all running in 5 days? The 2 men exchanged glances. The younger one, David, spoke first. "No offense, but we need someone with experience handling commercial vehicles. This isn't a hobby project." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them pictures of some of the work he had done over the years. "Diesel engines, commercial trucks, even some industrial equipment. I've been working on vehicles for 12 years. I know trucks, and I know how to work fast when there's a deadline." The older man studied the photos with growing interest. "These are impressive, but we'd need references, proof of insurance, a proper shop facility." "Mr. Richardson," David said quietly, "we don't have time for the usual vetting process. If we don't get those trucks running soon, the Harrison contract is gone. That's 30% of our revenue." Richardson looked at Marcus more carefully. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus Chen. And before you ask, I recently left my last job. Not because of my work quality, but because of a disagreement with my boss about client selection. It was a careful way of telling the truth without going into details about the Hells Angels situation." Richardson seemed to appreciate the honesty. "Tell me what you think the problem is with our trucks," Richardson said. Marcus thought for a moment. 12 trucks all down at the same time. Either you got a bad batch of fuel, or there's been some kind of systemic maintenance issue. Could also be a recall problem, depending on the make and model. They're all Ford F-550s, 2019 models. Started having problems 3 days ago, one after another. Diesel or gas?" "Diesel," Marcus nodded. "Sounds like contaminated fuel or a bad DEF system. The diesel exhaust fluid system on those trucks is sensitive. If someone sold you bad DEF or if there's water in your diesel tanks, it could take down your whole fleet." Richardson's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "Our regular mechanic spent 2 days just figuring out what was wrong. Because I pay attention to patterns. When multiple vehicles from the same fleet fail at the same time, it's usually something they all have in common. Fuel is the most likely culprit." David leaned forward. "Assuming you're right about the diagnosis, how quickly could you fix them?" "If it's just contaminated fuel and DEF, I could have the first truck running today and the rest done by Saturday. But I'd need access to proper equipment and a place to work." Richardson made a decision. "Our warehouse has a service bay. It's not fancy, but it has the basics. Lift, air compressor, electrical. Would that work?" "As long as I can get parts delivered, yes." "What about payment?" David asked. "We usually pay net 30. Marcus shook his head. "I need half up front and half on completion. And I'll need money for parts immediately." It was a risk asking for such unusual terms, but Marcus was in no position to wait 30 days for payment. He needed cash now, and he needed to establish that this was a professional arrangement, not a favor. Richardson thought for a moment, then pulled out his business card. "William Richardson, Richardson Logistics. We'll pay your terms, but I want a written estimate and a guarantee that the work will be done by Saturday evening." "Deal." They shook hands, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. This was exactly the kind of challenge he thrived on. Multiple vehicles, tight deadline, demanding client. It was what he had been trained for. "One more thing," Richardson said as they gathered their things. "If you pull this off, there might be ongoing work. We have other clients with similar problems, and word gets around in our industry." After they left, Marcus sat back down and tried to process what had just happened. 20 minutes ago, he had been filling out an application to work at a sandwich shop. Now he had a contract that could pay more than he used to make in a month. But first he had to deliver on his promise. 12 trucks, 5 days, and a reputation he was trying to rebuild. The stakes couldn't be higher. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon calling parts suppliers and arranging for everything he would need to be delivered to Richardson's warehouse. He also called a tool rental company to get some specialized equipment he didn't own. That evening, he drove to the Richardson logistics facility to look at the trucks. The warehouse was impressive, clearly a successful operation with dozens of employees and millions of dollars worth of equipment. The broken-down trucks sat in a neat row behind the building, looking like expensive paperweights. Marcus climbed into the cab of the first truck and turned the key. The engine cranked but wouldn't start, and the dashboard showed multiple warning lights. He popped the hood and immediately smelled something that confirmed his diagnosis: contaminated fuel. Someone had sold Richardson's company bad diesel, probably mixed with water or some other contaminant. The fuel had damaged the injection system and fouled the DEF sensors. It would be expensive to fix, but it wasn't complicated if you knew what you were doing. As Marcus made notes about what parts he would need, he thought about Tommy's words from the diner. Maybe he was right that Marcus didn't understand people very well, but he definitely understood machines, and right now that was exactly what he needed. Walking back to his car, Marcus felt more confident than he had in weeks. Tomorrow he would find out if he could really deliver on the bold promise he had made to Richardson. If he succeeded, it could be the start of something new. If he failed, he would be right back where he started, but with even fewer options. Marcus arrived at Richardson Logistics at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before the normal business day started. He had barely slept, his mind racing through the repair process and potential complications. The parts delivery truck was already waiting in the parking lot, which was a good sign. The warehouse was quiet except for the security guard who let him into the service bay. Marcus had brought his own tools and coffee, knowing it was going to be a long day. The 12 Ford trucks sat outside like sleeping giants, waiting for him to bring them back to life. He started with the worst affected truck, the one that had been the first to break down. The fuel tank would need to be completely drained and cleaned, the fuel lines flushed, and several sensors replaced. It was methodical work that required patience and precision. By 10 o'clock, warehouse employees were arriving for work, and many of them stopped by the service bay to watch Marcus work. Some seemed skeptical that one man could fix what their regular mechanic had said would take weeks. "You really think you can get all these running by Saturday?" asked Janet, the dispatch manager. Marcus looked up from the fuel injector he was cleaning. "That's the plan. This first one should be ready for testing this afternoon. Our regular guy said the whole fuel system was destroyed, said we might need to replace the engines. Your regular guy was probably trying to sell you more work than you needed," Marcus replied diplomatically. "The fuel system is contaminated, but it's repairable. Expensive, but repairable." Around noon, David Richardson stopped by to check on progress. He watched Marcus work for several minutes before speaking. "You seem to know what you're doing," he said. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. "I should have the first truck ready for a test drive in about 2 hours. Want to stick around?" "Actually, yes. I'd like to see this." While they waited for a fuel system cleaner to do its work, Marcus and David talked about the logistics business. David explained how the company had grown from a single truck operation, started by his father, to a regional delivery service with over 100 vehicles. "Dad built this business by never missing a delivery," David said. "When these trucks went down, I thought we were going to lose everything we've worked for." "One bad batch of fuel shouldn't destroy a business," Marcus said, "though I'd recommend finding a new fuel supplier." "Already working on that." "How did you know it was fuel contamination so quickly?" Marcus shrugged. "Experience. When you see the same problems enough times, you learn to recognize the patterns. Your regular mechanic probably doesn't work on diesel fleets very often." At 2:30, Marcus turned the key on the first repaired truck. The engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life with a smooth, healthy sound. The dashboard lights went out one by one as the computer systems recognized that everything was working properly. David's face broke into the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "How long before the others are ready?" "If I work through the night, I can have 4 more done by tomorrow morning. The rest by Friday evening." "You're going to work all night?" Marcus nodded. "I gave you a deadline. I intend to keep it." What Marcus didn't mention was that he couldn't afford not to work through the night. The money from this job would cover his rent and bills for the next 2 months, but only if he completed it successfully. Failure wasn't an option. That evening, as the warehouse emptied out, Marcus settled in for a long night of work. He had positioned portable lights around the service bay and stocked up on energy drinks and sandwiches. The radio played classic rock at low volume while he worked his way through the systematic repair of each truck. Around midnight, he was surprised to see headlights pulling into the parking lot. A figure emerged from a car and walked toward the service bay. As the person got closer, Marcus realized it was William Richardson, David's father. "Couldn't sleep," the older man explained. "Thought I'd come check on how things were going." "Second truck is almost done," Marcus said, not looking up from the fuel line he was connecting. "Should have it running within the hour." Richardson pulled up a chair and watched Marcus work. There was something comforting about having someone else there during the long night hours. "You know," Richardson said, "I started this company 40 years ago with nothing but a beat-up delivery truck and a lot of determination. Worked plenty of nights like this myself." "Different when it's your own business," Marcus replied. "Is that what you want? Your own business?" Marcus paused to consider the question. "I never really thought about it before. I always just worked for other people. But lately I've been wondering if that's the right approach." "What's stopping you?" "Money, mostly. And I'm not sure I know how to run a business. I know how to fix things, but there's a lot more to it than that." Richardson nodded. "There is, but the most important thing is being reliable. If people know they can count on you to do what you say you'll do, everything else can be figured out." They talked through the night as Marcus worked. Richardson shared stories about the early days of his business, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. It was the kind of mentorship Marcus had never had, and he found himself absorbing every word. By sunrise, Marcus had 5 trucks running perfectly. His back ached, his hands were covered in small cuts from working with sharp metal, and he was running on nothing but coffee and determination. But the satisfaction of seeing those engines start one after another made it all worthwhile. Friday passed in a blur of similar work. Marcus developed a rhythm, moving from truck to truck in an efficient pattern. By Friday evening, 11 of the 12 trucks were operational. The last one had a more complex problem that required a special part that wouldn't arrive until Saturday morning. 11 out of 12 isn't bad, David said as they surveyed the nearly completed fleet. The deal was 12 trucks by Saturday evening, Marcus replied. "I'll have the 12th one done by noon tomorrow." "You're really something," David said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen anyone work like this." As Marcus packed up his tools for the night, he realized that this job had been about more than just money. It had reminded him why he loved being a mechanic. Not just the technical work, but the satisfaction of solving problems that other people couldn't solve. More importantly, it had shown him that maybe Tommy was right. Maybe he did need to think about what he was actually good at and how to build something with those skills. Working for Richardson had felt different from working at Frank's shop. Here he was the expert. He was the one making the decisions and taking responsibility for the results. Saturday morning, Marcus arrived early to install the final part and complete the last repair. By 11:30, all 12 trucks were running smoothly. Richardson Logistics was back in business, and Marcus had proven that he could deliver on his promises under pressure. As he prepared to collect his final payment, Marcus didn't know that this job would lead to opportunities he couldn't have imagined. He also didn't know that his path was about to cross with Tommy's again, in a way that would change everything. 3 weeks after completing the Richardson Logistics job, Marcus was working on his 4th emergency fleet repair when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Word had spread quickly through the trucking community about the mechanic who could fix entire fleets in days instead of weeks, and his calendar was booked solid. "Marcus Chen Mobile Fleet Repair," he answered, still getting used to saying the name of his new business. "Marcus, this is William Richardson. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, Mr. Richardson. Is there a problem with the trucks?" "No, the trucks are running perfectly. Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. Can you come by my office this afternoon?" Marcus agreed to the meeting, curious about what Richardson might want. The fleet repair business was going better than he had dared to hope. He had invested in a mobile repair truck equipped with all the tools and parts he needed to work on site at client facilities. The overhead was low, the demand was high, and he was making more money than he ever had working for someone else. Richardson's office was on the second floor of the warehouse, with windows overlooking the dispatch area where drivers picked up their route assignments. The older man gestured for Marcus to sit in a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I've been thinking about our conversation that night when you were working on the trucks," Richardson began, "about you wanting to expand your business but not knowing how to handle the business side of things." Marcus nodded. "I'm learning as I go, but there's definitely a lot I don't know. I have a proposal. Richardson Logistics is expanding into equipment maintenance and repair. We want to offer our clients comprehensive fleet services, not just delivery. I'd like you to consider becoming our exclusive mechanical services partner." The offer was unexpected and potentially huge. Richardson Logistics had hundreds of clients throughout the region, many of whom operated their own vehicle fleets. "What would that involve exactly?" Marcus asked. "We'd provide you with a proper facility, help you hire additional mechanics, handle all the business development and billing. You'd focus on what you do best, fixing vehicles. In return, we'd split the revenue 60-40 with you getting the larger share." It was an attractive offer, almost too good to be true. But Marcus had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed perfect. "I'd need to think about it," he said. "Of course. Take your time. But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." Richardson opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several photographs. They showed Tommy's Harley-Davidson, the same motorcycle Marcus had repaired weeks earlier. "Do you recognize this bike?" Richardson asked. Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Yes, I worked on it. That's the job that got me fired from my last position. I know. What you don't know is who that motorcycle belongs to." Richardson turned the photos around so Marcus could see them clearly. One showed Tommy standing next to the bike, but he was wearing a business suit instead of his usual leather and denim. Another showed him shaking hands with several men in what looked like a corporate boardroom. "Tommy Richardson," William said quietly. "My brother." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the photographs, trying to process what he was hearing. "Your brother? But he's a Hell's Angel. He has the patches, the attitude, everything." William smiled sadly. "Tommy is many things. He's a weekend biker, yes. He rides with a group that likes to look tough and act dangerous. But he's also the vice president of Richardson Logistics and one of the smartest businessmen I know." Marcus felt like the world was shifting around him. "But the motorcycle club is mostly middle-aged guys who work regular jobs during the week and play outlaw on weekends. They're about as dangerous as a bowling league. Then why did my boss react the way he did? Because Frank Delacroix believes what he sees in movies. He thinks every biker is a criminal and he let his prejudices cost him a good employee." Marcus sat in stunned silence, remembering his conversation with Tommy at the diner. The man had seemed amused by Marcus's situation, almost like he knew something Marcus didn't. Now it all made sense. "Tommy told me about meeting you at the diner," William continued. "Said you seemed like someone who had learned a hard lesson about making assumptions. He was testing me? In a way. Tommy has a talent for reading people. He said you took responsibility for your situation instead of just blaming bad luck. That impressed him." Marcus thought about all the events of the past few weeks. The chance meeting at the coffee shop, the fleet repair opportunity, the rapid growth of his business. How much of this was coincidence? William smiled. The Richardson Logistics job was real. We really did have 12 broken trucks. And you really did fix them faster and better than anyone else could have. But Tommy may have mentioned to David that he knew an unemployed mechanic who was supposedly very good at his job. So this whole thing was arranged. The opportunity was arranged. What you did with it was entirely up to you. You could have failed miserably and we would have found someone else to fix the trucks. Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb everything he had learned. His entire world had changed because he had fixed a motorcycle for the wrong person, except it turned out he had fixed it for exactly the right person. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because if you're going to be our business partner, you should know the whole truth. And because Tommy thought you deserved to know that sometimes good things happen to people who do good work, even when it seems like everything is going wrong." Marcus thought about Frank's paranoia and prejudice, about his own assumptions and mistakes. He thought about the Hell's Angels patches that had cost him his job, and the business suit Tommy had been wearing in the photographs. "What does Tommy think about your partnership offer?" It was his idea. He said anyone who could rebuild a Harley engine that well and still show up for work after losing their job because of it Was someone worth investing in? Marcus laughed, despite himself. The irony was almost too much to believe. The motorcycle repair that had destroyed his old life had been the foundation for building a new one. "I'll take the partnership," Marcus said. "But I want to meet with Tommy again. I have some questions." "I'm sure you do. He's actually waiting downstairs. He thought you might want to talk to him after we finished." As Marcus walked down to the warehouse floor, he saw Tommy leaning against a workbench, wearing jeans and a Richardson Logistics polo shirt. The transformation from dangerous biker to respectable businessman was complete, but the amused expression in his eyes was exactly the same. "So," Tommy said as Marcus approached, "figured it out yet?" "Some of it. You could have told me who you were. Could have. But then you wouldn't have learned what you needed to learn." "Which was what?" Tommy smiled. "That sometimes the thing that looks like the worst mistake of your life turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. And that maybe, just maybe, you're better at understanding people than you thought you were." Looking around the warehouse, watching the drivers and dispatchers going about their daily work, Marcus realized that Tommy was right. He had learned something important about assumptions and appearances, about taking responsibility for his choices, and about the difference between working for someone else and working for himself. The Hell's Angel who had cost him his job had turned out to be the businessman who gave him a career. And the motorcycle repair that had seemed like such a disaster had become the foundation for everything good that followed. Sometimes, Marcus thought, life had a sense of humor that was better than anything you could plan.